Welcome, everyone. I'm going to be breaking down the NBA April 18th playoff slate, which I think this is one of the hardest slates I've seen in a long time because it's very easy to identify the value on the slate, but what do you do with that value, right? Because you're going to have Sharks throwing out 50, 100 lineups with all this value locked in as their core. And if you play the same players, chances are you're not going to take down a GPP. So more than ever, lineup construction is going to be very important to differentiate yourself, especially on small slates too. And I think playing small slates makes you a better DFS player if you put a lot of effort and thought to it and then, learn from your results. So let's start with Raptors Philly, where Scotty Barnes, I guess we'll go through injuries first, then we'll jump into that game. So Scotty Barnes ruled out, Gary Trent doubtful. Thad was initially doubtful, but is now questionable with the thumb injury. And I think if he's available, that actually could be pretty big news for DFS. What other injuries we got? So we got Curry on a minutes limit still. I think that's it. I'll get to other injuries if I find them along the way. All right, so Raptors Philly. You have a ton of value on the Raptors side with Barnes out, Trent out, Thad possibly out. So one popular person is going to be Precious Achiuwa. Now, earlier in the season when Van Vliet and I think Barnes or Anunoby was out, he played against Philly 40 minutes, had a good game, and they actually won that game. Of course, it wasn't the playoffs. So he's going to be popular. And I think he'll get the start. And I think they should start him. The Raptors actually tried starting Siakam at the 5-game one, and it didn't exactly work out. Once I actually heard they were starting Siakam at the 5, now that sports betting is legal in New York, I right away did this over on Embiid rebounds, and the odds I got for the over on Maxey on this just made no sense. He's going to be playing 40 minutes a night in the playoffs. Like, what did he drop? He's not going to do this every night, but I think he dropped 38? 38 points. I mean, he's not going to be dropping 30 plus a night, but literally makes no sense. Easiest $315 of my life. So, that being said, Maxey coming off an amazing performance, his price is still way too cheap, $6,400. And other injuries, obviously Luka forgot. So we'll get to Dinwiddie and all the Dallas players in a sec. So what do you do with Maxey, right? Way too cheap. Probably not going to have the same performance he had game one, but he could definitely hit value. He could be in the optimal. So you definitely can't fade any of these guys with value. But if you're only making a couple lineups, I would look elsewhere for point guard or for your guard spots. Because one, there's a bit of recency bias. I don't think that's a huge factor, but his ownership might get a little inflated coming off game one. And I think the Raptors will have a similar game plan, right? Focus on Harden, focus on Embiid, and that's why Maxey and Tobias had great games. That being said, I don't think Maxey puts up that same incredible performance. I think he's going to have a good one. As far as the Raptors, let's look at them. Now, with all these guys out, with Trent and Barnes out, bench players might seem more attractive, but knowing Nick Nurse, I think he's just going to play the starters more unless it's a brutal blowout. So it's very hard to fade these players. If you want to go very contrarian, you could assume it's just a brutal blowout and fade most, if not all, Raptors. While I don't think that will be the play, boy, will you have leverage if you do that. So if you're only making a couple lineups and you want to differentiate yourself, I wouldn't recommend that. But I would recommend not playing Maxey at point guard. Okay, let's go back to Philly and Toronto players. Okay, so let's look at some projected ownership. Stats are important, but this slate more than ever, it's going to come down to theory crafting, lineup construction. It's going to be difficult. So Harden 31 to 35%. I think he was like 33% last slate about. That makes sense. His price is probably too cheap, even though he hasn't like had that monster game of like 70, 80 fantasy points. So, especially after Maxey and Tobias having sick games, I think it makes sense to go higher than the field on Harden and even Embiid. It's going to be tough to go Embiid with Jokic on the slate too, and the value with Ichua, and you could put Siakam at center too. But I would recommend going higher on the field a little bit with Harden and Embiid. Two wildcards that are going to be very interesting. So if Thad does play, I think he's only 3,500. Where is he? Am I just not seeing him? Oh, maybe he's not on here. Yeah, I think it's 3,500 on DraftKings. And if he gets the green light, I'm throwing him in a bunch of lineups. Like, if he plays 20 plus minutes, we've seen what he can do on a per minute basis. Plus, I think he's really good, and he's a vet, and it's a perfect spot for him if he can suit up with a bunch of starters out. Okay. So getting away from Siakam is going to be tough. He's going to play like 40 plus minutes. His price is probably too cheap as well. So if you had to, and same thing with Anunoby, like he's going to be probably playing 40 plus. He seems to be over his injury. He only played 33 in game 1, but he's going to be playing 40 plus as long as he avoids foul trouble or stays healthy. One Raptor who hasn't been playing efficiently is Van Vliet. Let's look at his projected ownership. 31 to 35. That's fair. If you were going to not play a Raptor, it would probably be Van Vliet if you're, making one lineup, assuming that ownership projection is accurate. I mean, he could crush value, but there's way more value at point guard today. I touched on Maxey. With Luka out, we have Dinwiddie. We have Brunson. We'll get to them. So, if Thad plays, what you can do is you can throw him in the center spot or forward spot, but I'd recommend the center spot. Let's go to centers for everyone. All right, Jokic, obviously, 41 plus, makes sense. Embiid, ownership is fair. Gobert didn't have an amazing game, fantasy-wise, but his price is fairly cheap, so I think, where was it? I think 36 to 40 is a little high, but I think it'll be definitely above 25. You have value with Ichua, who could have a better real-life contribution than a fantasy contribution, but it's a good spot for him, obviously, and he's going to play heavy minutes, so you can't fade him. But let's say you put Thad at center, right? You're saving a ton of salary. And you don't want to fade Raptors, right? Like, it's probably not going to be the play to fade Raptors. So if you're going to not play one just to make it a little different, don't play Van Vliet. Don't play Maxey. I think you need Anunoby if he's playing 40 minutes. I think you need Siakam if he's playing 40 plus minutes. Like, I think they both will probably be in the optimal lineup. And when I say don't play, I'm talking about if you're making a few lineups. When I say don't play, don't fade them, because any value you just can't fade on this slate if you're making a bunch. It's really risky to do that. So yeah, one way to differentiate your lineup, that at center. There was another point I wanted to touch on this game. Let's look at the ownership for projected ownership for Tobias. Still low. I mean, it was a great performance, but no one is really expecting him to have exactly as good of a game. Now, another wild card in this is Chris Voucher. We know his upside, but like I said, Nick Nurse might just play the starters more minutes and not give Voucher more. Right? I mean, I think he would trust Thad more than Voucher in the playoffs. But if he does see 30 minutes, which he could, tremendous upside. And he's only 4,400. So if you want to make a unique lineup, you could play both him and Siakam. Or if you want to get a little crazy, you could play both him and Thad if that is ruled in. All right, let's touch on other guards instead of going game by game. I think that'll be more helpful. So with Luka out, obviously Dinwiddie at 6,600 is going to be extremely popular, and I like him a little bit more than Maxey if you had to pick between them. Brunson's a bit more expensive, which I think will make I like Brunson a lot today. He played about 40 minutes. And if we look at his previous matchup in the season with Utah, it's just one game, of course, but he scored 44 fantasy points in only 32 minutes, right? If he has that same kind of efficiency, he's going to be scoring 50, 60. And at 13 to 16% owned on a small slate, that, I mean, has a ton of leverage. Now, one person I think will go overlooked who missed a couple threes, but if he's hitting his threes, if he's playing good defense, Reggie Bullock. Where are you at, Reggie? He's small forward and shooting guard eligible. 4,800. Only 17 to 20% projection, playing huge minutes. If he's hitting his threes, I think he could be a complete steal. It's not the sexiest play, but like I said, if you're trying to make a unique lineup, put him in guard, in the shooting guard or the guard slot. Because not everyone, most people are going to be taking Maxey, throwing him in at point guard, Dinwiddie, throwing him at shooting guard or point guard or guard, right? So with good value there, you're not going to dip down to get Bullock in the forward spots. You're gonna be paying up for people like Jokic. You're going to be rostering Anunoby. You're going to be rostering Bogdan, who played 40 minutes, coming off a great game. While I'm on Bogdan, I think he took 20 shots. I mean, it's a lot for him. So if I had to choose between him and Anunoby, I'd probably go Anunoby. Although playing Bogdan is a ton of fun. Another person in that game whose price is just simply too low, it's going to be very hard to get away from, is Mitchell. 8,300. Only shot 10 for 29, which is another reason why I think Bogdan shot 20 times to score. And he still scored 52 fantasy points. So out of all the chalky plays, 20, that's way too low. I don't think 26 to 30 is going to be accurate. Out of all the popular plays, I like playing Mitchell again the most. There's no way he's 26 to 30. He's going to be more popular at that price. So going back, so if we're talking about Dallas, Utah, while we're on this game, I think you need Bullock if you're making one lineup. You just have to hope he hits his ceiling. It's whether he's hitting his threes or not. And if we look at the correlation with Dinwiddie, pretty high. Brunson, positive, but not as much. So if you're going Dinwiddie, I think tonight you throw in Bullock with him. Or you don't play Dinwiddie, and you just go Brunson if you're not in love with the Reggie play. Brunson will give a lot of leverage too, at only 13 to 16% owned. And I think his ceiling is slept on because he plays with Luka most of the time. You know, Dinwiddie we know is ceiling in spot starts, but I think Brunson's actually slightly higher, which is reflected here. Okay. Anyone in that game? All right, let's go to Golden State versus Denver. Nobody really knew how much Curry was going to play. I think he saw like 22 minutes. Let's double check. Yeah, 21, 41. I think he'll see around 25, and there's just too much. There's just too many better options in the slate. The chance of him, which he can do, of like dropping like 60, 70 fantasy points in 25 minutes isn't that high. If you're making a bunch of lineups and you want a lot of leverage, you could throw him in one, but I don't love him. Now we got Jordan Poole, who I loved, especially for player props yesterday. I think I bet on him scoring over 24, which is way above like the average over under for him. Dropped 30. I think he's another great play. His price raised again, so he's not my favorite. I'd rather go Clay at 7,400. I think he is. Yep. And if you look at Clay's correlation this year, it was higher with Draymond in the past, but very good with Poole. So you could always play both if you want to get away from the value guards and Dinwiddie and Maxey. Jokic, obviously you can't fade him. Didn't have his best fantasy game. Still scored above 50, but by doing that, especially with Kyrie going off the other day, he wasn't going to be. At least I don't think he was in the optimal. He might have been in the winning lineup, but wouldn't have made optimal with that at that price. Let's just go to those two teams. Let's see what the ownership projection on Barton is looking like. 26 to 30 seems a little low to me. That's a very cheap price. He scored, 44 fantasy points? No, just 40. And I think he'll do something similar, right? So he's cheaper than Dinwiddie. He's cheaper than Brunson. He's cheaper than Maxey. So I'd go heavier on the field if this is accurate, 26 to 30. If you're going Barton, I probably wouldn't play Jokic again. They could be in the same lineup, but I would advise just playing Barton. Or if you're going to play Jokic, maybe Monty Morris because he's cheap. Don't love Aaron Gordon in this matchup. Another tough player to roster, given the value, the cheap value, and given the studs that you're going to also want to roster, is Draymond. I mean, any night he could have a triple double, right? He's not going to score a ton of points, but you got to, it wasn't a close game. He only saw 29 minutes and he still put up 40 fantasy points. If he plays 35 minutes, he could definitely score 50 plus with a triple double. So this is a little low lower than it should be. So I think if you're making one lineup, definitely play Draymond. No one else is really that interesting from that game. Porter has a good per minute ceiling, didn't have the best game one, but still saw 25 minutes. So if you're making a bunch, you could definitely throw Porter in a few. Let's start making an example lineup if you're only making a couple lineups, how to get some leverage. So we're not playing Maxey in this one. Now, we have to play some Raptors. I don't think fading them completely is. I think it's it's just being contrarian for the sake of being contrarian, which I don't love doing. I like there being some thought process behind it, right? So I think you need Anunoby. Um, let's play him in the small forward spot because we're gonna go a little contrarian with our guard spots. I think that's where you can have a lot of leverage on this slate. Very hard to get away from Siakam. Very tempting to play Voucher. A tough argument would be Voucher versus Precious. They're about the same price. Obviously, Voucher has a higher ceiling, but Precious could see 40 minutes if he avoids foul trouble. Let's not play Van Vliet. What's his ownership again? Oops, passed it. Yeah, it's a little high for me. Obviously not fading him, but let's hold off on Van Vliet. I'm definitely going to play Mitchell. It's just too cheap of a price. Dinwiddie will be extremely popular. I need someone to fill the point guard slot. And if I'm not playing Maxey, Morris could be in the optimal, but likely he's going to score around upper 20 fantasy points, low 30s, which wouldn't be enough. So I'm going to play Brunson. I think he could be the key to this slate. Another Raptor I'm not really fading to. I mean, I'm probably just as high in the field as Siakam. I think he'll be higher than that. He's going to play massive minutes, assuming he avoids foul trouble, and it's not a complete blowout. Center. Yes, Precious doesn't have the highest ceiling, but he's a good deal today if he plays 41 plus. He's another Raptor that I think you have to be about the same as the field on. Okay. Now, last three spots, we might move them around depending on the rest. Now, we definitely can't play Jokic, which is terrifying, but if you're making one lineup, I mean, look what he only scored 50 something fantasy points at that price, which isn't great. So let's say it happens again. Now, Barton, what was his projection? 26 to 30. I think that'll be higher, but if that's true, I want Barton. Like I said, Reggie will go overlooked. Not the sexiest play, but does have upside. Doesn't happen a lot, but the upside is there. What does that leave us with at 4,900 left? Monty Morris is another not super sexy play, but I really wouldn't want to play him with Barton. I don't think that makes a ton of sense. Let's say Barton is much higher than I thought in terms of ownership. We could move Anunoby into guard. Also another, if you're making a bunch of lineups, some Mavs you could take a dart throw on would be Kleber. They only played Powell 22 minutes in game one, and I think that's just to try and stretch the floor with Gobert. He probably won't hit his ceiling. He may only play 20 something minutes, but at 3,800 you could do worse. See, so Maxey. Yeah, I think let's move Anunoby to the guard slot. Or Bullock, but let's try it for now. And if that is ruled in, I want that. So let's play Bullock here. I guess we could have just keep Anunoby there because he's on the earlier game. Bullock in the guard slot. Let's see what we get if we play Thad in the forward spot. Oh, all right, he's not in the slate. Okay. So let's see. Let's just do a placeholder for him. I played Danny Green. I never loved playing Danny. I never played Danny Green, but I figured the vets would have a big impact on game one. I played Danny Green. I played Jeff Green. Didn't work out in those lineups. All right, so if we play Thad, right, this is just a placeholder. We have 6,900, which gets us Tobias, which I'd rather play Dinwiddie over Tobias. Well, let's see. What if we just play Dinwiddie here? 7,500. That's interesting. We could get Van Vliet. We could get Clay. Clay will, I'm assuming, be much lower owned. Yeah. It's a tough one. Yeah, I'm going to stick to my guns and play Brunson, though, and we'll figure out a way to reconstruct this. Let's say Thad's ruled out, so we don't have that option at 3,500. So Reggie, we can move to forward if we need. 5,200 average. What do we play all three? 38. Okay, that's kind of interesting, actually. But let me just move Bullock to forward if we're doing that. Bullock. Wait. And if you want to take that chance on Kleber, this is the lineup to do it. Like I said, he's not my favorite play. But him or Bertans, if they're hitting their threes, do have upside. 24 minutes. Usually he doesn't do much with them. Let's take a look. Yeah, playing mid-20s, not really barely hitting value at that price. But maybe they give him more minutes, right? Maybe Powell getting only 22 minutes is an indication of their strategy moving forward. But I think that's a little too many Mavs. Only because they're not all correlated with each other. Look, Kleber is probably not highly correlated if, Brunson, Dinwiddie, and Bullock are all scoring, because Kleber's main Kleber's main contributions are scoring. Okay, idea. Okay. What if we play Bullock and Voucher? Low-cost guys with upside. Makes sense to play Voucher a little bit more if Thad's ruled out. That gets us 6K. I would not throw Aaron Gordon in there. I love Bogdan. I was trying to not play him just because I don't think he's going to be taking 20 shots again. However, if game one showed us anything, it's that, they both can hit value. Mitchell, 52. Bogdan, 40. And it could happen again, Sometimes keeping it simple is the easiest thing to do once you've already made it, a good lineup construction. So let's go with that. Voucher, Bullock, Bogdan. So here it is. Nothing too crazy, right? We're still playing Raptors. We're not playing Maxey in this one. We're not playing Dinwiddie in this one. That alone is a pretty big difference for most of the field. And I think Bullock, if he hits his ceiling, and Brunson, if he hits his ceiling, takes you to the top. So here it is. Here's my thought process behind making a unique lineup construction. So didn't end up putting Draymond in here. but he's also someone I would consider if you're only making a few. Clay also 7,400 in an awkward price range with all that value at guard, but I'd rather pay up 8,300 for Mitchell. It is what it is there. So let's just summarize what we did to make this unique. So no Jokic, no Maxey, no Dinwiddie. That soaks up a ton of ownership there in itself. Makes it a lot different from the field. Draymond didn't make it in. He's someone I like if you're making a few. I mentioned that. Same thing with Harden. His price is like very cheap. I know we haven't seen his crazy games, but he definitely could make the optimal. So don't fade him. But like I said, if you're just making one lineup, you have to make certain assumptions and you have to craft it in a unique way. You know, sometimes the game theory way to think about it rather than trying to predict how the game flow is just the way to go. Although I of course like to try and work everything out in my head and predict how the game's going to go and then make assumptions based on that. But in small slates, you have to prioritize this. One Raptor we didn't play in this one, Van Vliet, who will be popular. And I kind of like that he's at 7,500 because it makes rostering Brunson even a little more awkward at this price. So here we have it. Anything else to touch on? Finney Smith's an interesting play. He's kind of like Bullock. He's not sexy, but if, especially with Luka gone, a little bit more usage, can get a ton of defensive stats, can hit threes. I wouldn't be shocked if, he's in the optimal lineup. Not my favorite play. Similar to Ichua, where his real life contribution is more often than not better than his fantasy contribution. And one other thing, like thought process to avoid this slate that was originally my first thought was like, okay, I identified, Maxey has value, Mitchell has value, Dinwiddie has value. So you identify all these guys, and if you're trying to make a unique lineup, you think, okay, I just have to fade them all. No, you don't have to fade them all. Most people will be playing a bunch of them, right? But you can still choose which ones you want. Like I chose Mitchell, right? I chose to do Ichua, but at the same time, I didn't also roster Dinwiddie. I didn't roster Maxey. So it's not like it's not like an all or nothing approach with value, and trying to be different. So hopefully this was helpful and hopefully you learned something. Let's see how this lineup will do. I'll make an exact lineup of this. And of course, I can be wrong, but I'm happy with my thought process behind this lineup. And it's all about the process. I guess we should have had Embiid in this, right? No. Okay. Good luck. And I'll see you next time.